We're very pleased to have Peter McCall on Can Do FM. Now, Peter is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Cumbria. Now, you have been on Can Do FM before, Peter, but it's very nice to see you again. How are you?
I'm really good, and thank you so much for helping to set this up, and helping us to make contact with folk in and around Barrow. It's really important that we do that.
Thanks. Now then, we have had a great response to our little call out for questions. So thank you to everybody who sent in a question. Unfortunately, we can't get everybody's question in. So what we've done is we've put the questions sort of together, and they're sort of like an umbrella question, because obviously people were asking about similar topics. However, if you feel that this interview doesn't cover the question that you've asked, or you'd like more clarification on it, then I'm sure you're more than happy, aren't you, Peter, to get in touch with people on an individual basis?
Absolutely, and I would encourage folk to contact us in the office. Email is best. If they email Commissioner at Cumbria pcc.gov.uk, and I'm sure we can put those details on your website or whatever, and folk can get in touch anytime.
We certainly will, yes. Okay then, well, let's make a start. Here's our first question. Why isn't enough being done to tackle antisocial behaviour and drug abuse in specific parts of our town? For example, Egerton Court.
Sure. I mean, you could almost glibly say, well, what is enough? Because, I'm a realist, and I don't believe, I'd like to think there was a magic wand that we could wave to eliminate all antisocial behaviour and all use of drugs, but life just isn't like that. But it's important, I think, to say what is being done. I'm really pleased to say that actually antisocial behaviour here in the county reduced by 5.8% in the last year. Some of that would have been due to COVID, but it does show that the police are tackling antisocial behaviour, and we certainly take it extremely seriously, because I know that's what really annoys the public, and it's important to the public. In Barrow, actually, Sergeant David Proctor chairs the local focus group with partners, and I think this is a really important part of the response to that question, because there can sometimes be an assumption that the police can solve all behavioural problems, and drugs as well, and that's just not the case. Often, antisocial behaviour is about often young people, children who, for whatever reasons, are hanging around on the streets, doing the stuff that, to be honest, kids have always done, and we probably did it in our day. But as a result of not having anything else to do, or not being supervised, sometimes I've got to say it's down to parents not knowing where their kids are and what they're up to. And so we all have a part to play in that. What I certainly wouldn't want to be doing is saying to anyone, the answer is locking kids up or fining children. We don't want to criminalise young people. And that's why, the answer, I think, to antisocial behaviour is a whole package of things. It's about how we bring our children up with values and standards, good values and standards. It's about parents taking responsibility for knowing what their children are doing and up to. It's about us as communities and councils providing facilities for them so that there are, constructive things for them to do. But there is, without question, an element that, sometimes it doesn't matter what you provide. Some people, some folk will get into trouble and will misbehave. And when it comes to that, then there is a role for the police to get engaged. And I'm pleased to say that the proactive team in Barrow are doing exactly that. They won't be able, they can't be everywhere all the time. That's just the reality of life. But again, this is where we as members of the public have got a role to play. And if you think there's a particular antisocial problem issue in your area, please do report it in. And I'm not going to suggest that you'll immediately see a blue light flashing the second you call. But if the police get, simultaneous or a number of calls about a particular incident or place or individuals, that builds up the intelligence so that they can focus resource to go and deal with it. And so it is worth contacting the police. And actually, I would go as far as to say it's our responsibility as citizens and as members of community to inform the police, because the police can only act on information. So, we all have a part to play in that. On the drugs piece, it's a similar story. I think there are two sides to the drugs issue. One is people who want to take drugs. And again, that's often about social issues. It's about housing, it's about employment, mental health, and a whole raft of reasons why people get drawn into drugs and using drugs. And then on the flip side of that is those people who supply and sell drugs and deal in that awful trade. Now, the social issues that cause addiction or lead people into addiction, again, there isn't a policing response to that. That's a community
multi-agency response to that one.
Absolutely. But for the dealers and those who peddle drugs, absolutely, that's a police response. And the police, do constantly, and we're constantly locking dealers up. I'm much more concerned, I have to say, not necessarily about the very small petty dealers on the street corner, because frankly, you lock one of those up, they're probably not going to go to jail when they get to court. And if you do lock them up, there'll be another one the next day, because that's how this drug trade works. The people we've got to get to are the people further up the food chain, the ones who are really making the money out of this and dealing with county lines. And what the police are doing there is not just working locally. Cumbria Police work with the regional organised crime unit and indeed National Crime Agency above that, working together right across the region. And we've had several. I haven't got the exact number, but it's in excess of 40 drug dealers this year jailed or significant sentences. So there's lots going on. I don't pretend that it's all fixed. It's a constant battle. But again, I do appeal to folk, give the police information so they can act.
We live here in Barrow. We might think we're living in quite an urban society, but of course there are many parts of our region that are quite rural. What are the Commissioner's plans regarding rural crime?
Sure, and right at the outset, I'd say rural crime is not particularly a crime type. It's where it happens. The actual crime tends to be the same thing. It's taking stuff that you shouldn't take or doing things you shouldn't do, like speeding and so on. So it's the same issues, but in a much more dispersed area. And actually, Cumbria is the second largest county in the country geographically, with one of the smallest forces in the country. So there's a lot of ground to cover. So there's another common theme here, and it's about information, and it's about us and our part in this process. But over the last 18 months, you'll have heard about Operation Uplift to increase the number of police officers right across the country. We've had our share of that, and indeed the 2 years previous to that, we were increasing officer numbers modestly. And what have we done with them? Well, actually, we've opened up now 14 small police stations or deployment centres across the county. Places like Wigton, Appleby, Kirby Stephen, Alston, Ambleside, Millham, Windermere, Ulverston, places that haven't had police officers based there for a long time. We've put them back in, and they're operating not just in those small towns, but reaching out into the local areas. As we're still recruiting more officers at the moment.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that, because I mean, yeah, they might be there, but if it's just one or two officers, they're going to be a bit overwhelmed, aren't they?
Well, they are. There's always more work than you can do, but I have to say, one or two officers is one or two more than we've had for a very long time. And there are some places where actually you don't need as many officers. You know, there's some parts of the county which, in fact, most compared to the rest of the country, Cumbria still is a very low crime area. We should remember that. But something we're also looking at doing is considering community beat officers. Now, something like the PCSOs, but police officers with all of the powers, the full powers that a police officer has. And that's something that we're looking at trying to roll out as we recruit even more officers.
Okay, because that sort of takes us into another question, and quite a few people mentioned this, that the feeling that there was very little police presence, and that makes people feel quite vulnerable.
Yeah. And it is a common theme, and I hear that all the time. And I have to say, I've got to be honest with people. You're not going to see officers just wandering around the streets, for the sake of it. That is, frankly, anyone in policing will tell you that's not a good use of police time. I do absolutely accept that it helps, people feel safer if they see a police officer wandering around the town centre, for example. But the reality is,
don't want to interrupt you on that one, but in Barrow, there have been cases of assault, quite violent assault or sexual assault over the summer. I can think of a couple of cases off the top of my head, and I think in conjunction with trying to get people to come back to the town centre and use the town centre has to feel safe for people to want to do that. And I think quite a few people might disagree that having a police presence doesn't make that much difference. I think quite a few people might think that it does.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are a lot of people who think that. And I'm not saying that it doesn't make people feel safe, because I know it does. But, it's all about priorities. And you have to say, how many assaults happen in full view of a police officer? Actually, very, very few. Criminals are not generally daft enough to do that. But I absolutely take the point about this feeling, a perception of safety. But what the police have to do is weigh that against the reality of crime and the crimes that none of us, or very few of us, see. And this is where the challenge comes, because it's all about balance and where you prioritize. And high threat crimes like child sexual exploitation, scamming people online, domestic abuse, the county lines drug dealing that we've just been talking about, that doesn't happen. That catching those people does not happen by wandering around on the street. There are in crime are detectives, the people who actually go and investigate and put the evidence together to convict people of these high harm crimes, actually don't wear uniforms at all. And so there's lots of policing activity going on that we don't see. And I know that doesn't help people to feel safe, but that's going on all the time. And it comes down to choices and priorities. Putting people into 101 is another example of this, where you have to say what in the areas of real vulnerability to the effects of crime, you have to put the resource into that. So it is a balance. But I have to say, there are now more officers on the streets than there've been for many, many years. But I know we'll never satisfy everyone about on that.
Yeah.
And it is also about putting them out into, because actually, whilst people may not feel that they're well served in a town centre like Barrow, actually, there's more resource there than there is in many other parts, and our rural parts, which is where we started on this. And so it is getting that balance right.
Now, Peter, I take your point about, the antisocial behaviour and actually witnessing crime and then getting in touch with the police and reporting that. But a few people are telling us that, it takes quite a long time to get a response when you call 101.
Sure. 101, to be honest, is the bane of my life. And there have been times over the last 5 years when the wait time on 101 has been unacceptable, frankly. And I would just remind folk, my job is not necessarily to promote the police or to defend the police. It is to scrutinise and make sure that the police are delivering the best possible service to residents. So I absolutely take the point about 101 and have spent a lot of time digging into this and the issues. I think it's important to make the point that 101 is for non-emergencies. And it's really important to make that point because for 999, when you really need police support quickly in an emergency, here in Cumbria, we actually have one of the best responses in the country. And your 999 call, if you make one, is answered on average in under 3 seconds. And it is important that people understand that. If you've got a serious situation, you need urgent police support. Here in Cumbria, you will get that urgent response, immediate response.
But is that answering the call? What's the response time to actually turn up on the scene?
Well, that depends. I mean, there's just 101 scenarios for that. But the other significant thing is here in Cumbria, almost uniquely, when your call is answered, you're speaking immediately to a police officer because we have police officers manning the phones. In other parts of the country, you might get a quicker response, but it's someone who's triaging the call. And if they think you need to speak to an officer, then you go into another queue to wait for an officer. So, and that does distort figures. Here in Cumbria, when the phone is answered, you're speaking to a police officer. Now, back to 101. Remember, it's for non-emergencies. The wait time at the moment, because we have just put more resource. In fact, I think I've got the wait times for August. In August this year, we had 12,500 101 calls. The average 101 call waiting time in August was 4 seconds. That's average. So some would have been longer, some might have been shorter. Before those changes were put in and we had extra staff, the average wait time was nearly 5 minutes, which I think 3 minutes is what we're aiming for. But I have to say, when you look at other public agencies, in fact, non-public agencies as well, on call lines and call centres, it's not unusual to be, waiting 5 minutes. You try ringing the tax office, for example. And so I think we've got used to this idea that we need instant gratification. I've rung, so I should expect an instant response. And the other thing to remember is that there is no other organisation that I can think of where you can ring 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for non-emergency issues. And again, the challenge is about balance. We could say, right, well, we're going to put more resource into the control room to answer your call more quickly. But that gives you less resource to actually do something about it. So going back to your point about what happens when you've made the call, if everyone's answering the phone, no one can go out and actually deliver any. So it's getting that balance right. But in addition to all of that, we have introduced email. We've just started doing online chat with 101 to give other ways of making that contact. Now,
Absolutely.
I know straight away,
there's loads of ways, isn't there? Email, perhaps even social media would be a way for people to communicate.
Absolutely. And those channels are there as well. I mean, often I get folks will say to me, well, not everyone's on email, but I have to tell you that probably 98% of the complaints I get about 101 come in on an email. So again, it's about understanding that that's how it works. And you know, I have to keep making the point that these are non-urgent issues. Therefore, it's, you know, perfectly sensible, I think, to get in contact using one of the other media. I know some people will always want to talk to an officer, and that's fine. But if you insist on that, then sometimes busy peak periods, it will take a bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's just more appropriate to email or use social media, especially if you literally just want to report a concern.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Let's move on then. Let's consider the question of road traffic accidents. Now, a lot of people very concerned about this. Obviously, Cumbria has seen probably one of its busiest summers for many, many years. You know, the staycation taking hold. We know here on the Low Furness Peninsula how important our A590 is and how often that has been snarled up this year, sort of cutting us off, really. You know, I mean, it's nearly every week there seems to be an accident on the A590 at some point or other. And then also people are concerned about, I hesitate to say, but perhaps young people speeding in residential built-up areas, and you know, the perception that they seem to just get away with it. What are the plans to reduce the number of fatalities, the number of accidents? What can we do?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's lots to do, and of course, lots of it, like everything, rests in our hands as citizens, because you know, at the end of the day, it's us getting behind a wheel of a car that actually creates these scenarios. So, and you know, I hate sounding like a stuck record, but we've all got our own part to play in this. But speeding is one of the biggest issues certainly in my mailbox. And generally, just so that folk know what happens, when we get complaints about speeding, we do put those to a multi-agency group who actually then conduct surveys on that patch of road. And they've got you may have seen the rubber strips across that appear on patches of road. And they actually monitor the speed of vehicles. And I would say that in probably most cases, the average speed is far less than we would think. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 miles over the speed limit. But inevitably, you do always get the odd idiot who speeds, you know, totally. And for me, that's an antisocial crime. And those are the people that we really need to catch and get off our roads. So, and that really is about roads policing. It's about our mobile cameras and targeting those. But it's also about how we, and this is where the multi-agency piece comes in, is the engineering of our roads and calming measures and all of that sort of thing. And that's where the police are continually working with highways agency, with councils. And another misconception that I'd like to take the opportunity to dispel is that the police cannot and do not set speed limits. That is very much a council responsibility, and it's quite an important principle there, that the police enforce laws, they don't make them. It's for the democratic process, if you like, to make the speed limits. But it is a big issue, and we do have roads police patrolling our roads all the time. But coming back to what we said earlier, we are the second largest county in the country. We've got the largest number of small roads to police, and very often, actually, our rural, quiet roads are where people can and do speed, and where it's particularly dangerous. But, again, I've got to be realistic, and I wouldn't say to people that we will have police patrolling those roads all the time, because it would be an impossible task. But they do patrol them, and often do and are catching people. And so it comes back to us all to be responsible when we get behind the wheel of the car. And if everyone did that, we wouldn't have these issues.
Yeah. And perhaps also the point you were making before, that if you have a concern, if you report it, then there'll be a body of evidence, won't there, that somebody
Correct.
will be looking at, and then if enough people are reporting the same incident in the same stretch of road, then that can be highlighted.
And indeed, individuals. If there is some clown in a souped-up car who thinks he's, the bee's knees, driving in your area antisocially, then I'd urge, and you're not being a grass. You're just doing the right thing to report this person, and you can do it anonymously. And if you don't want to talk to the police, ring Crime Stoppers, and that will prompt someone to go and knock on their door and say, "Oi," and often that's exactly what would happen. They'd get a warning initially. And know that people are watching them, and often that's all it takes for someone to just calm down and behave responsibly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, for your time, Peter. It's been really interesting talking to you. Just another thank you to all our listeners who got in touch. Your responses have been read, and we've tried to cover the main areas that you raised as concerns. However, as I said at the beginning, if you would like a more detailed response to your particular question, then please get in touch at here's the website. It's commissioner-pcc.gov.uk, and that website will be on our social media page and website. We hope to see you again soon. I think this has been really interesting, very successful, and perhaps we can do the same thing again in a few months' time.
I'd love to, and thank you very much for the opportunity, as I said earlier, and I just echo my gratitude to the folk who've bothered to ring in or email in with questions, because it's really good to get the opportunity to try and explain some of the issues in the background. So thanks a lot to everyone.